A condemned man to the gallows, the fearless cowboy Caleb Stone faced a shocking injustice, but the judge offered him a choice that seemed like a new humiliation. Behind this was the ruthless Sheriff Charles Hunter, whose revenge was ruining the life of a defenseless widow and her 10 children. However, fate had a special move in store. Caleb chose Martha Johnson, starting a chain of events that turned everything upside down. But just listen to how shocking the turn of this drama was, and why justice, in the end, prevailed, giving the hero and his new family a priceless lesson in wisdom that will make you look at life in a new way. Subscribe, like, and watch to the end, because the denouement of this story is truly shocking, and at the end, a valuable conclusion awaits you, comparable to the modern world. The bright sun of the Wild West, merciless and indifferent to human suffering, pierced through the dusty windows of the courtroom in the town of Blackwood, Arizona. It was a muggy August day in 1880, and the air was electrified with the tension hanging over the crowd that had gathered for the verdict. At the center of attention was Caleb Stone, a man in his mid-30s, with a face carved from stone and eyes the color of a winter sky. His reputation was ambiguous. On the one hand, he was known as a fearless sharpshooter, capable of taming a wild Mustang with one hand. On the other, as a man who always kept to himself, seeking neither friendship nor enemies. He never went back on his word and always kept his promises. It was this quality, oddly enough, that led him to the defendant's bench. A month ago, Caleb, while saving his sister, the young widow Emma, from bandits who attacked their ranch, was forced to kill 3 of them. One of the men killed turned out to be the brother of the local sheriff, the corrupt and influential Charles Hunter, who immediately accused Caleb of murder. Despite the obvious self-defense, there were no witnesses except Emma, but her testimony was interpreted by Judge John Wesley, known for his adherence to the law, as biased. Sheriff Hunter, a man with a predatory look and a malevolent smile, sought the most severe punishment, hanging. The crowd gathered in the hall was divided into 2 camps, those who believed in Caleb's guilt and those who considered him a hero. But now their voices were drowned out by the bang of the judge's gavel. Judge Wesley, a corpulent man with a flushed face and a bald head that gleamed in the candlelight, raised his hand, calling for silence. His voice, low and rough, echoed through the hall. Caleb Stone, you are found guilty of killing 3 men. By the laws of this state, you face the death penalty by hanging. A gasp mixed with whispers of indignation rippled through the crowd. Caleb only smirked. His gaze was cold and calm. He had expected this. He was ready to die for his sister if that was the price. However, the judge continued, pausing for what seemed like an eternity. Given the circumstances, namely, that you acted to protect your family, as well as your impeccable service on the front during the Civil War, the court, as an exception, offers you a choice. His eyes, small and penetrating, settled on Caleb. Instead of being hanged, you may take any unmarried woman in this town as your wife. Any one, Caleb. Your choice. Refusal means the sentence will be carried out immediately. A deathly silence hung in the courtroom. Women in the front rows covered their mouths with their hands, and the men exchanged surprised glances. This was an unprecedented decision, strange and humiliating for many, but for Caleb, it sounded like an opportunity to escape inevitable death. On the other hand, it was a sentence that would bind him to someone for the rest of his life. His gaze slowly scanned the faces of the women sitting in the hall, searching for answers. Some were young and attractive, others were married or already elderly. He didn't know any of them. His life was focused on work, on survival, and women had always been a mystery to him, something distant and incomprehensible. He felt hundreds of eyes on him, awaiting his decision. Sheriff Hunter, standing to the side, smirked. There was schadenfreude in his eyes. He knew that this choice for Caleb would be just another form of humiliation. He expected Caleb to choose the most beautiful and youngest, and then be forced to live with her, forever tied to a place he most likely hated, or that he would refuse, confirming his pride and receiving his sentence. Judge Wesley, noticing the sheriff's smirk, just smiled. He liked to play with people's fates. Time dragged on. Caleb felt drops of sweat trickle down his temples. He had to make a decision that would determine the rest of his life. He looked for his sister Emma in the crowd, but she wasn't there. The sheriff probably hadn't allowed her to be present. Suddenly, his gaze fell on a woman sitting in the very last row, almost blending in with the shadow. She was dressed in a simple, worn dress. Her head was bowed, and her shoulders were slumped. No one paid attention to her. She was invisible. Her face, if one could make it out, seemed haggard, and Caleb felt a strange, inexplicable compassion. This woman was not a young beauty, not a rich heiress, but just a woman, forgotten and lost in this harsh world. "Who is she?" Caleb asked. His voice was low but clear, and it echoed through the hall, drawing everyone's attention to the woman in the last row. She flinched and raised her head. Her eyes, full of sadness and fatigue, met his gaze. Judge Wesley, squinting, looked in that direction. "That's Martha Johnson, Mr. Stone. A widow, 10 children, no prospects. I wouldn't recommend it. She's a burden." There was a slight disdain in his voice. The crowd murmured, surprised by this choice. No one expected Caleb to pay attention to such a woman. But Caleb didn't hear the whispers or the judge's contemptuous words. He looked into Martha Johnson's eyes and saw in them a reflection of his own life: loneliness, struggle, injustice. He saw in her a strength that many didn't notice, a strength that could be hidden behind a tired gaze. At that moment, he made a decision that shocked everyone but was the only right one for him. His decision was not impulsive, it came from the depths of his being, from his life experience, from his understanding of justice. He was not choosing a woman who could bring him benefit or pleasure. He was choosing a person who, like him, was broken, but not completely broken. "I choose Martha Johnson," Caleb said. His voice was firm and confident, drowning out all the whispers and amazed gasps. The word sounded like a gunshot. Sheriff Hunter gritted his teeth. His malevolent smirk slid off his face, replaced by pure anger. Judge Wesley, stunned, froze with his gavel raised. No one expected such a turn of events. Caleb Stone, known for his harsh character, chose not a young beauty, but a forgotten widow with 10 children. This was the beginning of a story that would change not only his life but the life of the entire town. Caleb Stone's declaration sounded like an explosion in the midst of a dead silence. The courtroom erupted in an indignant murmur, mixed with astonished exclamations. Judge Wesley, lowering his gavel, looked at Caleb, his flushed face expressing a mixture of bewilderment and hidden irritation. This was not the outcome he had foreseen. Sheriff Charles Hunter, his smirk gone, clenched his fists, his gaze becoming truly malevolent. Not only had this savage killed his brother, but he had also dared to ruin his carefully orchestrated plan of humiliation. Martha Johnson, who was sitting in the very last row, flinched from the unexpectedness. She raised her head. Her tired but now wide eyes met Caleb's gaze. They held in absolute disbelief, mixed with a glimmer of hope that she had long buried. Her tattered dress seemed to suddenly become even more absurd in the light of this incredible event. The 10 children she could barely feed suddenly became part of this public drama. She was a forgotten soul whom no one noticed, and now the whole town was looking at her. The judge, coming to his senses, cleared his throat. "Mr. Stone, are you sure of your choice? This is an unbearable burden. 10 souls, hungry and without a future." He was trying to talk Caleb out of it one last time, hinting at the absurdity of his decision. "I'm sure, Your Honor." Caleb's voice was like steel. He didn't take his eyes off Martha. His decision was made. After a brief, dry ceremony that the judge conducted with all possible haste, Caleb and Martha found themselves on the dusty street of Blackwood. The hot midday sun was beating down mercilessly, but now it seemed less scorching to Caleb than the gazes of the townspeople. People came out of saloons, stores, stopped on the sidewalks, looking at them with curiosity, contempt, or hidden mockery. Martha walked a little ahead, her shoulders slumped, her head bowed low. She was embarrassed. Caleb followed her, his Winchester rifle on his shoulder and a revolver on his belt. His face was impenetrable, but inside he felt the weight of a new burden. "Where are we going, Mrs. Stone?" Caleb asked. His voice was rough but without judgment. Martha flinched. "Home, Mr. Stone." "Home, that's a big word. A hut on the outskirts, beyond the creek." She spoke softly, as if apologizing for her poverty. The walk to Martha's home took no more than 10 minutes, but it seemed like an eternity to Caleb. The closer they got to the outskirts, the dirtier and more dilapidated the houses became. Their home turned out to be a decrepit shack, cobbled together from old boards and in places boarded up with pieces of tin. The barn, if it could be called that, was barely held up by props, and the fence was completely missing. Around the hut, like a pack of small wolf cubs, children were scurrying about, from toddlers who had just learned to walk to teenagers whose faces were covered in dust and dirt. 10 pairs of eyes, hungry and wary, stared at the stranger with the rifle. Their clothes were patched and faded, and their hair was matted. "Mom!" Shouts rang out. The children rushed to Martha, hugging her as if she were their only salvation. Martha hugged them all, trying to calm them, but her gaze kept returning to Caleb. "This is Mr. Stone," Martha said, her voice trembling. He will live with us." The children, pulling away from their mother, stared at Caleb. Their eyes held not fear, but rather a wary curiosity mixed with a faint hint of contempt. They had seen too many adults who came and went from their lives, leaving behind only promises and shattered hopes. The oldest boy, about 12, named John, the tallest and thinnest of them, with penetrating but weary eyes, came a little closer. His gaze was direct and defiant. "Why did you come here?" John asked. His voice was thin, but it held a hidden hostility. "We don't need you, and neither does Mom." Caleb didn't answer immediately. He lowered the rifle, leaning it against the wall of the shack. For the first time in a long time, he felt at a loss. He was ready for bandits, for prison, for death. But he was not ready for 10 children, hostile and hungry. He looked at Martha, who stood, hugging the smallest ones, and her gaze pleaded with him not to get angry. "I'm here because the court decided so," Caleb finally said. His voice was unusually soft. "And I'm here to help. If you'll let me." John just snorted, but the other children fell silent. Their little faces turned to the stranger. They didn't know what to expect from him. Martha, noticing that Caleb didn't show aggression, became bolder. "Children, this is Mr. Stone. You're your new father," Martha said, her voice sounding a little more confident. "He is a good man." The word father sounded foreign and absurd in this setting. Caleb felt something inside him clench. He had been alone all his life, and now he was surrounded by 10 little, strange lives who looked at him with distrust. He looked them over. Sarah, or red-haired girl about 10, was holding a chubby baby. The twins, 5-year-old Lily and Tom, were hiding behind Martha's skirt for more, whose names he didn't yet know, were somewhere in between. And the oldest, 17-year-old Matthew, was absent. "Matthew went to the city for work," Martha explained quietly, as if reading his mind. "He only comes back in the evenings." Hunger and poverty were etched on the faces of every child, in their dulled eyes, in their thin hands clinging to their mother's clothes. Caleb felt not just compassion, but a sharp, burning sense of injustice. These children deserved a better fate. He remembered the judge's words about an unbearable burden, and now he understood how right they were. But this only strengthened his resolve. He never abandoned what he started, and now his life was connected to them. "What do we have to eat?" Caleb asked, turning to Martha. "And what can be done with this house?" Martha just threw up her hands, her gaze full of despair. "To eat maybe just some old bread and water. And the house it's falling apart." At that moment, Caleb realized that his struggle was just beginning. It was a battle not with bandits and corrupt sheriffs, but with life itself, with poverty and despair. But looking at the 10 pairs of eyes that looked at him with weariness and a faint hope, he felt a new strength being born in him. He was a lone wolf, but now he had a pack to protect. Sheriff Hunter thought he had humiliated him, but Caleb felt not humiliation, but a challenge. A challenge he was ready to accept. The first day in Martha Johnson's hut was a real test for Caleb Stone, far more difficult than any shootout or chase. He, accustomed to the vastness of the desert and to solitude, found himself in the center of chaos, where 10 pairs of children's eyes watched his every move. Hungry looks, weariness, and the open hostility of John, the oldest of the children, created an atmosphere in which even the most fearless cowboy would feel uncomfortable. The sun was setting, painting the sky in crimson tones, but inside the hut, gloom and despondency reigned. The walls, patched in places, let in drafts, and the roof threatened to collapse with the first strong wind. Caleb inspected the room. One old, creaky bed, one chair and a table made of several nailed-together boards. On the table was a single clay mug, chipped and dirty. The children, like wild kittens, huddled around Martha, who was sitting on the floor, trying to calm the smallest ones. "There's no food, Mr. Stone," Martha said quietly, as if reading his mind. "We haven't eaten anything but leftover bread since this morning." Caleb nodded. It was clear to him that they had to start with the most basic needs. He left the hut, taking his Winchester with him. Martha's son, John, followed him, his thin arms crossed over his chest, his eyes never leaving Caleb. "Where are you going?" John asked. His voice was shrill. "To find food," Caleb answered curtly, without stopping. "We can do that ourselves," John shouted after him. We don't need your help." Caleb just stayed silent. John's words didn't anger him, but they made him think deeply. He understood that trust here had to be earned, and words wouldn't help. Only actions. He headed for the nearest creek, hoping to shoot some game. He was an experienced hunter, but in the twilight and in an unfamiliar area, the task was not easy. While Caleb was gone, attention reigned in the hut. Martha tried to distract the children by telling them old fairy tales, but their ears were glued to the sounds outside. John sat in the doorway, clutching a piece of an old knife in his hand, ready to protect his family from anyone who tried to harm them. He didn't trust Caleb, considering him just another stranger who would only bring new problems. When the stars had already scattered across the velvety sky, Caleb returned. He was carrying a pair of rabbits in his hand and a bundle of dry branches on his shoulder. He ignored John's worried glances and simply entered the hut. Martha gasped when she saw the game. Tears shone in her eyes for the first time in a long time. The smell of fresh meat instantly attracted the children's attention. "John, help me build a fire," Caleb said. His voice was calm, but it held a note of expectation that left no room for argument. John hesitated for a moment. His gaze met his mother's eyes, who nodded. Reluctantly, but obeying, the boy began to gather stones for the hearth, while Caleb skillfully dressed the rabbits. Soon, a small fire crackled in the hut, and the smell of roasted meat filled the air. The children, forgetting their hostility, surrounded the fire, their eyes, gleaming with anticipation, followed Caleb's every move. Martha, with trembling hands, accepted the piece of meat he offered her. She divided it among the children, making sure everyone got at least a small piece. The youngest ones ate greedily, their faces smeared with soot. John, receiving his piece, ate slowly, but his gaze at Caleb changed. It no longer held pure hostility, only a shadow of distrust and a barely noticeable interest. After dinner, when the children, full, were already falling asleep, curled up in balls on the floor, Caleb left the hut. Martha followed him. The night was cool, and a dead silence hung over the desert, broken only by the chirping of crickets. "You're a good man, Mr. Stone," Martha said softly. Her voice was full of sincere gratitude. "Thank you." Caleb looked at the stars. "I'm doing what I have to, Mrs. Stone. You and your children, you need protection." "But why? Why did you choose me?" Martha asked. Her voice was almost a whisper. "I have nothing. Only problems." Caleb turned to her. His face was serious. "Because I saw more than just fatigue in your eyes, Martha. I saw strength, the kind of strength many people don't notice, and I believe you deserve a second chance. You and your children." He didn't talk about his motives, about how Judge Wesley and Sheriff Hunter had tried to humiliate him. He just said the truth he saw. At that moment, Martha felt her heart, long accustomed to loneliness and despair, tremble. This harsh man, who seemed so distant and impenetrable, didn't just come to avoid the gallows. He came to fight for them, for their future. The next day, Caleb began to repair the hut. He was a jack of all trades, and his experience, acquired over years of wandering, now came in handy. He reinforced the walls, patched the cracks, and mended the roof. He made simple furniture from old crates and discarded boards he found on the outskirts of Blackwood. His hands, accustomed to a revolver and a lasso, now deftly handled a hammer and saw. Martha, initially timid and silent, became his loyal assistant, and the children, seeing his perseverance and the results of his work, gradually warmed up. John, the eldest boy, who was at first the most hostile, now constantly followed Caleb, watching his every move. He saw how, under the hands of this harsh man of few words, the shack was turning into something resembling a real home, how new life was being born from old fragments. In his eyes, the wariness slowly faded, giving way to genuine curiosity and even admiration. The other children also stopped being afraid of Caleb. Little Sarah, the red-haired girl who now helped Martha in the kitchen, often brought him a mug of water, and the twins Lily and Tom boldly approached him to examine his revolver or to pet the old Winchester rifle that always lay in the corner of the shack. The work was only part of the new life. The main problem remained food. What Caleb brought from hunting was barely enough for one day. 10 hungry mouths required constant sustenance, and Caleb understood that this couldn't continue. He couldn't sit idly by while his new family starved. He had to find a job that would provide a stable income. One evening, as the sun was almost hidden behind the horizon, painting the sky in orange and purple tones, Caleb, having finished repairing the old barn, came out of the shack. Martha followed him. "Mr. Stone, you do so much for us," she said quietly, "but you need money. I know there's work in town. At Mr. McGregor's ranch. He's always looking for strong men." Caleb looked at her. "I know, Martha, but my reputation, and Sheriff Hunter, he won't leave me alone." Martha lowered her head. "Yes, that's true. But if you don't try, we'll never get out of poverty. The children, they deserve a better life." Her voice held not a plea, but a quiet, yet firm, resolve. The next morning, having decided to accept the challenge, Caleb went to town. He put on his best, though worn, clothes, and cleaned his hat and revolver. His appearance in Blackwood did not go unnoticed. The townsfolk looked at him with the same curiosity as on the day of the trial, but now something else was in their gazes, perhaps respect for a man who hadn't given up, despite the circumstances. He headed straight for McGregor's ranch. John McGregor was a big, broad-shouldered Scotsman with fiery red hair and a beard, a man of strict rules, but fair. Caleb knew him from stories, but had never spoken to him personally. McGregor was sitting on the porch of his big house, puffing on a pipe and watching his cowboys work. "Mr. McGregor." Caleb approached the porch, taking off his hat. McGregor raised his head. His gaze was direct and penetrating. He recognized Caleb. "Stone, what do you need?" "Work, sir. I'm a good shot, I'm decent with cattle, and I'm used to hard labor." McGregor narrowed his eyes. "I've heard about you, Stone, and about the trial. You killed 3 men, and you married a widow with 10 children. That's a lot for one man." There was no judgment in his voice, just a statement of fact. "I don't regret my choice, sir. I was defending my family, and for that choice, I'm willing to work twice as hard as anyone else." McGregor looked carefully at Caleb, as if trying to read his soul. "I can give you a job, Stone. A cattle drive to Abilene. The pay is good. But there's one condition." He paused, his gaze becoming more serious. "Sheriff Hunter, he's your enemy, and he won't miss an opportunity to harm you. Are you sure you can handle it?" "I'll handle it, sir." Caleb's voice was firm. He knew Hunter would be a problem, but backing down wasn't in his nature. McGregor nodded. "All right. Tomorrow morning, at dawn, be ready. The crew will be waiting for you." He held out his hand to Caleb. Their handshake was firm. Caleb returned to the shack with a sense of relief and new resolve. He had found a job. He told Martha about his success, and her eyes lit up with hope. The children, hearing about the money, also livened up. This was the first step toward their new, better life. However, when Caleb came out of the shack in the morning to go to McGregor's ranch, he noticed a silhouette standing in the shadow of the old oak tree. It was Sheriff Hunter. His face, illuminated by the first rays of the sun, was cold and malicious. "Well, Stone," Hunter drawled. His voice was acrid. "You think you've won. You think I've forgotten about my brother. I won't forget, and you won't be able to run from your past. Neither you, nor your new family." He laughed, and this laugh, full of hatred, echoed in the morning silence. Caleb just looked at him. His hand involuntarily rested on the handle of his revolver. He knew that Hunter wasn't bluffing. This job was not just a chance to earn money, but also a test of his strength and determination. And he was ready for this test. The dawn of the next day painted the horizon in blood red and golden tones, promising a hot and difficult day. Caleb Stone, leaving Martha and the children at the shack, where they were still sleeping, headed for McGregor's ranch. The words of Sheriff Hunter about revenge echoed in his head, but Caleb didn't let fear overshadow his resolve. He was ready for a fight, for any trick Hunter could come up with. Anger burned in his chest, but it was cold and calculating, like steel. At McGregor's ranch, a crew of 5 cowboys was already waiting for him. Harsh, weather-beaten men who were no strangers to the long roads and dangers of the Wild West. Among them were Old Johnny, an experienced tracker with penetrating eyes, young but sturdy Bill with quick hands, and Jim, a quiet but reliable sharpshooter. McGregor, standing by the horse corral, greeted Caleb with a firm handshake. "Stone, you're on time," he said. "This is your crew. They know the way to Abilene. You'll be in charge. Bring my cattle back in one piece, and be careful with Hunter. He won't forgive." There was an undisguised warning in McGregor's voice. Caleb nodded. He quickly assessed his men. They were all experienced, but they lacked a single leader. He understood that he had to prove his worth not only to McGregor, but to them as well. The cattle drive to Abilene was a difficult and dangerous business. Thousands of head of cattle, dust, scorching sun, lack of water, and the constant threat of attack by wild animals or bandits. But Caleb was in his element. He was a born leader. His experience and intuition allowed him to foresee dangers, and his coolness and determination to deal with them. He skillfully managed the herd, leading it along optimal routes, finding water in the driest places, and organizing night stops to ensure maximum safety. The cowboys, at first wary, quickly came to respect Caleb. They saw in him not just a former prisoner, but a real cowboy, strong and fair. Johnny, the old tracker, often shared his knowledge of the area with him, and Dylan Jim carried out his orders without unnecessary words. In the 3 weeks it took to get to Abilene, they became a real team, united by common hardships. In Abilene, after the successful sale of the cattle, Caleb received his well-deserved pay. It was good money, an amount that could provide for Martha and the children for several months. He felt relief and pride. He had kept his promise to McGregor and, more importantly, to his new family. However, when Caleb returned to Blackwood, he was met not with joyful, but with alarming news. The shack he had so carefully repaired had been vandalized. The windows were broken, the door was torn off its hinges, and there was chaos inside. Martha was sitting on the floor, hugging the crying children, her face pale with fear. "What happened?" Caleb asked. His voice was muffled by rising fury. Martha looked up at him with tearful eyes. "Sheriff Hunter, he came. Said we had no right to live here, that this plot belongs to the city, and if we don't leave, he'll take the children." Her voice was broken by sobs. He threw out all our things, said it was a warning. Caleb clenched his fists so hard that his knuckles turned white. The anger he had been holding back for so long erupted. It wasn't just anger, but a rage that burned him from the inside. Hunter wasn't just threatening him, he had attacked his family, defenseless children. He had crossed a line. "Where's Matthew?" Caleb asked, trying to suppress the tremor in his voice. "He tried to stop them," Martha answered. "The sheriff beat him. He's now at the neighbor's, Mr. O'Malley's." Old man O'Malley took him in. Caleb, without saying a word, rushed to the neighbor's shack. He found Matthew lying on the bed. His face was swollen, and a huge bruise was under his eye. In the teenager's eyes, there was pain and humiliation, but also rage. He had tried to protect his family, but he was powerless. "Mr. Stone," Matthew rasped, "I couldn't do anything." Caleb put his hand on Matthew's shoulder. "You did everything you could, son, and now it's my turn." At that moment, Caleb felt something more than just anger. He felt like a real father, a protector who was ready to do anything for his children. He returned to Martha. "Gather the children, Martha. We can't stay here." "But where will we go?" Her voice was full of despair. Caleb took the money he had earned from the cattle drive out of his pocket and held it out to Martha. "I earned this money. It's enough to rent a good house in another part of town, far from Hunter. We won't live in this shack." His gaze was firm. "And I'll deal with Hunter, once and for all." Martha looked at the money, then at Caleb. A new hope slowly lit up in her eyes, mixed with anxiety. She knew that Caleb's anger was dangerous, but she also understood that only he could protect them. This was the beginning of a new battle, more brutal and personal than any other. After the destruction of Martha's shack and the beating of Matthew, Caleb Stone's fury reached its limit. He felt a cold, dangerous anger seething within him that demanded to be released. But Caleb was not the kind of man to rush into a fight with a hot head. He always acted with calculation, like an experienced hunter waiting for his prey. He decided not to look for Sheriff Hunter in his lair, but to lure him out, to provoke him publicly. He knew that Hunter was eager to humiliate him, and that was exactly what Caleb was going to use against him. Caleb rented 2 small rooms in a modest boarding house for Martha and the children on the other side of town, away from the sheriff's eyes. The money earned from the cattle drive gave them a break, but Caleb understood that it was only a temporary solution. The children, having survived the shock, gradually calmed down under Martha's caring gaze, but the shadow of fear still hung over them. Matthew, recovering from the beating, was eager to help, but Caleb forbade him from getting involved. This was his battle. The next morning, Caleb went to town. He deliberately chose the busiest time, when the streets were full of people. He walked down the main street. His figure, tall and slightly stooped, radiated a calm but palpable threat. His faithful revolver hung on his belt, and the Winchester rifle rested on his shoulder. He was like a predator that had come out to hunt, and his appearance did not go unnoticed. The townsfolk, busy with their affairs, whispered, pointing at him, but no one dared to approach. Caleb headed straight for the Last Chance Saloon, the largest and noisiest establishment in Blackwood, known for its whiskey and card games. He pushed the creaky door and entered. Inside, the usual morning noise reigned, the clinking of glasses, laughter, the voices of gamblers. But as soon as Caleb crossed the threshold, the noise subsided. All eyes turned to him. At one of the tables, playing cards with two of his henchmen, sat Sheriff Charles Hunter. His face, cunning and cruel, was distorted with malice when he saw Caleb. "Well, Stone," Hunter drawled, leaning back in his chair, his hand resting on the handle of his revolver. "You've shown up again. You think I've forgotten how you escaped justice?" A challenge ran in his voice. Caleb didn't answer. He slowly approached the bar, ordered a whiskey, and, without taking his eyes off Hunter, took a sip. "I didn't run, Hunter. I was defending my family. And I came for you." His voice was low and even, but it held a steely resolve. Hunter laughed, and his henchmen also guffawed. "For me? You're alone against me and my men, fool. You just signed your own death warrant." He stood up. His eyes gleamed with hatred. "You're mistaken, Sheriff," Caleb answered calmly. "I'm not alone." He looked around at the men in the saloon. "Many people in this town are tired of your power, of your bribes, of your corruption, of you using your position to oppress honest people. I saw what you did to Martha and her children. Is that the law, Hunter, or just your dirty revenge?" His words, spoken loudly and clearly, made some of the saloon patrons flinch. Some cowboys, sitting at the tables, nodded in approval. They knew that Caleb was speaking the truth. Hunter, noticing the crowd's reaction, turned crimson. "You're lying, Stone," he shouted, pulling out his revolver. "I am the law in this town." "No, Hunter, the law is justice, and you are a tyrant." At that moment, Caleb did what no one expected. He didn't pull out his revolver. Instead, he slowly, demonstratively placed it on the bar counter, and then raised his hands, showing that he was unarmed. A deathly silence hung in the saloon. "I won't shoot an unarmed man, Hunter," Caleb said. His voice was cold as ice. "But you can, if you have the guts to kill a man who doesn't resist. In front of the whole town." Hunter froze, holding the revolver on Caleb. His face was distorted with malice. He wanted to kill Caleb, but he couldn't. Killing an unarmed man in front of witnesses would mean finally losing the last shreds of respect, if there was any left. The tension hung in the air. Everyone was waiting for what the sheriff would do. His henchmen looked at him, waiting for an order, but confusion was in their eyes. Suddenly, a voice from the crowd rang out. "Hunter, put the gun down." "He's right." It was John McGregor, who had just entered the saloon. Behind him stood several of his cowboys, among them Johnny, Bill, and Jim. Their hands were on the handles of their revolvers. "What's the meaning of this, McGregor?" Hunter hissed. "It means we won't let you kill an innocent man, Sheriff," McGregor answered calmly. "Stone is our man, and he's right. You crossed a line, and we're tired of your ways." A look of animal fear flashed across Hunter's face. He understood that Caleb had not only exposed him as a tyrant, but had also rallied those who were ready to stand up against him. He lowered his revolver, his hand trembling. Caleb, without taking his eyes off the sheriff, picked up his revolver from the counter. "This isn't over yet, Hunter," Caleb said. "This is just the beginning." Hunter, throwing a look full of hatred at Caleb, turned and, accompanied by his henchmen, left the saloon. The crowd parted before him. A victory could be felt in the air, quiet, but palpable. Caleb turned to McGregor. "Thank you, John. You saved me." "You saved yourself, Stone," McGregor smirked. "But I'm glad we're on the same side. This town needs a change." He looked at Caleb with respect. "What now?" "Now we're going to Judge Wesley," Caleb replied. His eyes gleamed with resolve. "It's time for real justice." Walking out of the Last Chance Saloon, Caleb Stone felt the tension that had built up over the long week slowly recede, giving way to a cold, confident resolve. John McGregor and his men walked beside him, their presence adding weight to Caleb's words. The gazes of the Blackwood townspeople, which had only recently been full of curiosity and condemnation, were now replaced by respect and hidden hope. Caleb, yesterday's condemned man, today led a group of justice supporters. Their path led to the courthouse, which Caleb remembered well from the day of his trial. Heavy wooden doors, dusty windows, a symbol of power that could so easily break a man. But this time, Caleb was not walking as a defendant, but as an accuser. Judge John Wesley was sitting in his office, buried in papers, when the door burst open without a knock. He raised his head, his flushed face expressing irritation, which immediately changed to surprise, and then to a slight fear, when he saw Caleb Stone, John McGregor, and their men filling the small office. "Stone? McGregor? What is this intrusion?" The judge's voice trembled. He understood that this was not just a visit. "It's not an intrusion, Your Honor." Caleb's voice was firm. "It's a demand for justice. Sheriff Charles Hunter used his position to persecute me and my family. He vandalized my wife's home, beat her eldest son Matthew, and threatened to take the children. He laid out everything, not missing a single detail." His words were supported by the testimony of McGregor, who confirmed what he had heard with a nod. Judge Wesley leaned back in his chair, his face pale. He was a slippery official, skilled in manipulation, but a direct accusation, and in the presence of McGregor, was unexpected for him. He knew about Hunter's corruption, but preferred to turn a blind eye to it, as long as it didn't concern him personally. These are serious accusations, Stone," the judge mumbled. "Do you have proof?" "The proof is my wife's vandalized shack, which half the town saw," Caleb replied, "and Matthew's face, your neighbor, whom you must know." He spoke with such certainty that the judge could not deny the obvious. McGregor added, "And I testify that Hunter publicly threatened Stone, in my saloon, in front of everyone. This man is not the law, he's a bandit in a uniform." At that moment, Caleb felt the crowd of townspeople gather behind him. Rumors of what was happening spread quickly, and now people, driven by curiosity and long-standing discontent with the sheriff, came to see the outcome. Their whispers penetrated through the open office door, adding pressure on the judge. Caleb knew this was his chance. Wesley, realizing that his position was precarious, tried to stall for time. "I must conduct an investigation. This is not a one-day matter." "You don't have time, Your Honor." Caleb stepped closer to the table. His gaze was penetrating. "The town is tired of the sheriff's tyranny. The choice is simple. Either you enforce the law, or the people will take justice into their own hands. And then I can't vouch for the consequences." His words were not a threat, but a warning that the judge understood perfectly. Caleb's anger was righteous and weighty. Judge Wesley looked around at the crowd, then at McGregor, then his gaze stopped on Caleb. Fear was reflected in his eyes. He realized he was losing. This cowboy, whom he wanted to humiliate, turned out to be stronger and more influential than he could have imagined. "All right," the judge finally said. His voice was barely audible. "I am suspending Sheriff Charles Hunter from his duties immediately. An official investigation will be conducted. Until it is over, Hunter will be under house arrest." He raised his head. His gaze became more decisive. "And I will appoint a temporary sheriff until the investigation is completed." The judge's words sounded like a thunderclap. The crowd outside the office door murmured approvingly. This was a victory. Hunter was defeated, albeit temporarily. Caleb felt relief, but also a new sense of responsibility. He didn't just save himself and his family, he changed something in this town. "Thank you, Your Honor," Caleb said. "And what about Martha Johnson and her children? They are now homeless." Judge Wesley looked at him. "The town will compensate them for the damage, and I will personally make sure they are provided with decent housing and support until you decide what to do next." His voice no longer held the former disdain. He saw in Caleb not just a sharpshooter, but a man capable of achieving justice. It was an admiration, quiet, but sincere. Leaving the courthouse, Caleb heard the townspeople congratulating him and McGregor. People were shaking their hands, thanking them, expressing their support. Some of the women who, on the day of his trial, had looked at him with contempt, were now smiling at Martha, who was waiting for him with the children, a little way off. This was not just recognition, it was a restoration of honor. In the eyes of the children, especially John, Caleb saw pride. He felt the walls of distrust that had surrounded him crumbling. He was no longer a forgotten soul. He had become a part of this town, its protector. And that feeling was stronger than any reward. Several months had passed since the day Caleb Stone stood up to Sheriff Hunter, and Blackwood had become a different town. John McGregor, thanks to his reputation and influence, was appointed temporary sheriff, and under his leadership, order and justice began to be restored. Hunter and his henchmen were convicted and sent to prison. Their reign of fear had ended. The money that Bob Harper had once taken from Hunter was returned to Mr. Finch, and Bob himself, acquitted and rehabilitated, returned to Finch's ranch not as a simple worker, but as a manager, having proven his loyalty. For Caleb and Martha, these months were a time of tireless work and unexpected happiness. The town, at Judge Wesley's order, compensated Martha for the damage, and they were able to move into a small but sturdy house on the outskirts of Blackwood. Caleb, using his experience and the money earned from the cattle drive, began to build a small farm, raising cattle and growing vegetables. He was no longer a wandering cowboy. Now he had land, a family, and a purpose. The children, 10 souls who had once looked at him with distrust, now saw him as a father, harsh but fair, silent but caring. Martha blossomed. Her fatigue was replaced by a quiet joy, and her face, once haggard, was now lit up with a smile. She managed the household, took care of the children, helped Caleb on the farm. They worked together, side by side, and in their silent interaction, there was more understanding than in any words. Caleb, accustomed to solitude, discovered that he liked the noise of children's voices, Sarah's laughter, the playful antics of the twins Lily and Tom. He taught the boys how to handle horses and work the land, and the girls how to read and write, encouraging them to learn. John, in particular, changed. From a wary, hostile teenager, he turned into Caleb's reliable assistant. He absorbed his every word, every movement, learning wisdom and diligence from him. Matthew, the eldest of the brothers, now worked at McGregor's ranch, but every evening he returned home to help Caleb and spend time with his family. He was full of resolve to provide for his brothers and sisters. One evening, as the family gathered around the large, now sturdy table, Caleb, looking at his children, felt something warm spread in his chest. They were laughing, sharing stories of the day, and Martha, sitting opposite, was smiling. At that moment, he realized that his choice, made in the courtroom, was not just a way to avoid the gallows. It was a path to finding a family, meaning, and a real life. Judge Wesley, who had laughed at his burden, had no idea that Caleb had chosen not only a woman, but a future filled with love and meaning. The old townspeople, who had once contemptuously shaken their heads, looking at the forgotten widow with 10 children, now spoke with admiration about Martha Johnson and her family. The story of Caleb Stone became a legend of Blackwood, a story about a man who, rejected by society, found his honor and his place in life by protecting those whom everyone else had abandoned. He became a symbol of resilience and justice, an example that even in the harshest conditions of the Wild West, kindness and humanity can find their way. Martha's children, thanks to Caleb, gained not only a home and a father, but also hope for a future that had previously seemed unattainable to them. At one of the town festivals of McGregor hosted in honor of the new order, Caleb stood to the side, watching Martha dance with the children. Judge Wesley approached him, now without arrogance, with a faint smile. "Mr. Stone," the judge said, "I must admit that I was wrong about you. You surprised me, and the whole town." Caleb nodded. His gaze was calm. "We all make mistakes, Your Honor. The main thing is to admit our mistakes and correct them." Judge Wesley looked at Martha and the children. His eyes were full of respect. "You've created something wonderful here, Caleb, something that has given this town hope." Caleb looked at Martha, then at John, who stood nearby. His hands were strong, and his gaze confident. At that moment, Caleb realized that he had found his home, his family, and his true path. He, the forgotten soul, became the cornerstone of a new life, proving that true strength is not in solitude, but in caring for others. Conclusion and lesson for our viewers. Dear our grandmothers and grandfathers, you have just heard the story of Caleb Stone, a man who seemed destined for death, but chose a path that changed not only his own life, but the lives of many others. In our time, when the world is changing so fast, it's easy to feel forgotten or useless. We often see people chasing external glitter, wealth, or power, forgetting about the simplest but most important things: kindness, compassion, and sincere care for others. Caleb's story teaches us that a person's true value is not determined by their past mistakes or social status, but by their willingness to fight for justice and to lend a hand to those who need it. Martha Johnson was a burden in the eyes of society, but for Caleb, she became an opportunity to find meaning, a family, and true happiness. Think about how often in our lives we walk past those who seem inconvenient or problematic, missing the opportunity to find something valuable in them. This story is a reminder that the deepest changes begin with a single act of selfless kindness. Don't be afraid to choose the forgotten. Don't be afraid to take on responsibility. Don't be afraid to go against the current when your heart tells you the right way. It is in these moments that true admiration is born, not from loud feats, but from the quiet strength of spirit that is capable of transforming the world around us, even if it seems the harshest and most ruthless. Your wisdom and experience are treasures that can inspire the young to do the same.